Here's what happens when we don't try something and step out, even at the risk of failure, or when we avoid failure at all costs. The painful part is that we don't learn. We don't learn. So imagine we put ourselves in this, we put ourselves in this box of these are the safe things. These are the things that I know I can do without messing up. And so I'm just going to stay here. And imagine yourself and your business stuck in a box, because that's exactly what happens. We don't grow beyond the confines of that box, because the way that we learn is through failure. That's how we learn. I think John Maxwell is the one who coined the phrase, either I win or I learn, right? He doesn't say I win or I lose. He says either I win or I learn.
Welcome to the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast. Like most business owners, you already know you need good business and marketing strategies to scale and be profitable. But at some point, you've hit the dreaded wall where you feel stuck and frustrated. EQ for Entrepreneurs is for business owners and leaders who are honest enough to admit that they just might be the ones holding their business back and are brave enough to change that.
We're Noble and Kathy, and every week we're having candid conversations about all things emotional intelligence and how growing that has allowed us to get out of our own way and is radically transforming both our businesses and our personal lives. This is the secret sauce strategy for modern entrepreneurs who are tired of hustling without seeing results and want to grow a business and a life that they love.
Leaders, influencers, and entrepreneurs, what is going on? We are super excited to join you for episode
13. Today, we are talking about emotional intelligence and failure.
One of my favorite topics ever. I got a lot. So I went to West Point, which is United States Military Academy. Some of you may not have heard of it before. And the academics are very challenging for some of us. And suffice to say that I got lots of fantastics while I attended that school. So failure is near and dear to my heart for a long time.
and here's the thing. Nobody likes failure. Like, there's nothing fun about failure. And I think because of that, we're going to launch into a couple of reasons of why people don't like failure and kind of where that comes from. But here's the deal. This is part of the process. If you want to be successful in anything, you're going to have to face failure. I mean, think about a world-renowned pianist, somebody who plays the piano on stages around the world. How many times over the course of that person's lifetime do you think they've failed? Like, thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe in the millions. I don't even know. But it's a lot. And we can look at them and we can say, well, yeah, of course they had to practice and get better. And it was probably easy for them, but it's hard for me in my business, or it's hard for me learning this new skill. Guess what? It's not easy for anybody. I don't care who you are. Failure's hard. Failure's uncomfortable. Nobody likes it. And there are reasons why we avoid failure as much as we do. We're going to get to that in just a minute.
Yeah. And man, I tell you, as parents, right, none of us are perfect. We all have shortcomings. We all have areas to grow in. That's honestly one of the reasons why I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a couple years ago with my daughter. Is I had gotten comfortable in a comfort zone. And on the heels of your comfort zone is complacency. And on the heels of complacency is destruction. And it has been so neat to, pursue this I'm learning a whole new language called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it has been amazing at helping me continue to reframe failure in my mind.
Yeah. So let's talk about, how do you view failure right now? Like, what is it in your head right now? There's a couple different ways that people look at failure. Number one, they take it to mean that they're a failure as a person, right? They think that when they fail at something, that it reflects on them as a person, that it makes them a bad person, or that it makes them lazy, or that it makes them not intelligent somehow. And so that's one way that people look at failure.
Yeah, and just real quick too, quick admin note. If you want to have a spot to take notes, please feel free to download the journal page for this episode at www.eqforentrepreneurs.com/13 the number 13, the number 13. And then, as always, we'd love it. Please review, subscribe, and share if you're getting value from this podcast.
Yes, we appreciate you who do that. Big time. So another way that people look and decide what failure must mean is they think that it means something about their worth.
Oh man, and this is totally, I can absolutely relate with this one for sure. I used to be one of those ones, again, and I am the poster child for this episode, because for me, it used to define me. My failures define me. If someone said, well, Noble, who are you? Man, I screwed up this time in my life. I screwed up here. I screwed up there. I screwed up there. Like, that was almost like my calling card. My business card was all my failures. And it was my identity. It was who I was. I let every fiber of my being kind of absorb that view, that perspective, that mindset. And it absolutely impacted my, again, this is for entrepreneurs and leaders and influencers. It impacted my performance. It impacted my outcome. It impacted my ability to do what I feel God's called me to do, because I had this distorted and perverted view of failure, and an unrealistic view and expectation of failure and of who I was, that I had to be somebody. I had to be a certain way, live a certain way, talk a certain way, think a certain way. And then, right, again, as a recovering people pleaser addict, then I will be accepted, loved, affirmed, validated. When in reality, for me, just my personal faith, I'm a Christian. I need to seek out that love, validation, and affirmation from God, not from people, because again, it can be all consuming. And that's what happened to me. I allowed my failures and stuff to just impact my ability to impact those that I loved, and I love people. And anyway, it was just this crazy cycle that it impacted, kind of one of the next points. It impacted my, not also, so as a result of it impacting our present, it also impacted our future, because it impacted my present. And so that's another thing that, of how it impacted me as well.
And a lot of people think that just because they fail, that means that they'll never be successful in that one thing, right? They think, oh, I'm just not good at this. I'm not meant to do this. See, clearly I can't or clearly this is never going to work for me because look at this failure, right? And so we tend to look at that. And then what happens is a lot of people think that failure is final, that because they failed this one time or these 10 times even, that means that they're never going to make it, or they're never going to be successful in that thing that they're trying to do.
Yeah, and it's really important to understand, where does this viewpoint come from? And I know so many people, so many entrepreneurs, so many leaders and influencers that are severely limited in their lives because of how they view failure. Where did this distorted, unhealthy view of failure come from? Well, a few different spots. School, our public education system, and I'm not trying to knock teachers or whatever. I've got a lot of teachers, that are, friends of ours that are teachers. I love them. However, I feel like the system helps create this distorted view of failure, right? When I got fantastics in grade school, elementary school, high school, and college, well, but especially as a kid, when I got an F, right? Oh, snap! Hold the phone, stop the press. Like, hey, you're grounded. You need, until you get up your math grade, your whatever, physics, whatever. Yeah, and it was bad.
It was the thing to be avoided at all costs.
Absolutely,
at all costs.
And man, God forbid, you saw a big giant red F on your your homework, whatever. And honestly, for me, again at West Point, I literally reframed it, because I got another fantastic today, and I had to reframe it in my brain so that it wouldn't take me super south. and continue to negatively impact my performance on a downwards trajectory.
Yeah. And so here we grew up through in the educational system, programmed to avoid failure at all costs, right? Trying something and failing is never celebrated, or very frequently is it ever celebrated.
And to the tune of 14,400 hours worth. That if you went to a public school, private school, something like that, K through 12th grade, it's like 14,400 hours of programming that around a model that an F is bad, that failing is bad. It's a negative thing.
And then that just continues on. Probably a lot of us are raised in families where, and for good reason, we're not encouraged necessarily to fail. Because again, think about it. How many families, how many people, how many parents are encouraging failure for their children? Like, it's just society in general is very anti-failure. And then you go into the job world and think about it. In the job world, how many times is it encouraged to mess up, to screw up, to try something and fail? Like, it's just not encouraged. So our whole society construct is built around don't fail, don't mess up. Here's how to do it right. Now we expect you to do it this way and to do it correctly. And if you fail, that's not a good thing. So there's some very significant ways that this is affecting you and your business. It's affected us in our business that we had to learn through, and it's probably affecting some of you. One of the ways is by playing small. Right? So what happens is we think, okay, I know I can do these things and not fail at them, or at least not mess them up too bad. So I'm just going to stick to this, right? Even though it means that I'm playing small, even though it means that my business isn't scaling, at least I know I won't mess up, because that would be terrible. It would be awful. The worst thing that could happen to me is if I try something and mess up and fail at it.
Yeah, and another one is not taking risks. And again, as almost by definition, as an entrepreneur, man, that is like, it's almost one and the same. As an entrepreneur, you have to take risks. Now, obviously, calculated risks and thoughtful and do all your risk analysis and stuff. But the bottom line is, and I've used this analogy many times, as an entrepreneur, I can't count the number of times where we have jumped and built our parachute on the way down, and neither one of us are parachute makers, right? So, so it can absolutely negatively impact your ability to want to take risks, what type of risk, quality of risk, all that kind of stuff. So that's another thing. Another one is just being afraid to try. Fear, man, fear puts people in a rear naked choke and just really inhibits. And again, poster child for this stuff. Absolutely, much of my life, I have allowed fear to limit and dictate my decision-making process, and therefore our bottom line in terms of business and impact and influence, because of the fear that I have been gripped by, in my life.
And here's what happens when we don't try something and step out, even at the risk of failure, or when we avoid failure at all costs. The painful part is that we don't learn. We don't learn. So imagine we put ourselves in this, we put ourselves in this box of these are the safe things. These are the things that I know I can do without messing up. And so I'm just going to stay here. And imagine yourself and your business stuck in a box, because that's exactly what happens. We don't grow beyond the confines of that box, because the way that we learn is through failure. That's how we learn. I think John Maxwell is the one who coined the phrase, either I win or I learn. Right? He doesn't say I win or I lose. He says either I win or I learn. And there's so much wisdom in that. There's so much truth in that. So what does emotional intelligence have to do with this? Have to do with failure and how we view failure?
So again, so emotional intelligence is, this is a kind of a loose definition, but the ability to identify, manage, and employ our emotions for productive, positive outcomes, not only in our lives, but in assistance or helping other people as well, doing the same thing. And so emotional intelligence has a tremendous amount to do with how we view failure. And For me, and this is again true story. This is our journey. As my emotional intelligence has increased, as it's increasing, I am feeling more confident. Perfect example. Here's a story. This is a true story. So the last 2 or 3 times I've gone to jujitsu. So I've been in jujitsu for 2.5 years now, and I'm a big guy, and so normally I just always go to my back because I don't want to unfairly use my size over smaller opponents. And so what's happened is I've got a pretty decent defensive game, but I've had a very weak offensive game because, again, this fear that, well, man, I don't want to upset my opponent. I don't want to, again, be unfair and rolling with my opponent. And so I'm going to just play small. All these things. I'm going to play small. I'm not going to take risks. I'm going to be afraid to try. I'm not going to learn anything.
Yep.
Right? All those things we just covered. And so for whatever reason, and it wasn't even a conscious decision. Now I've known this concept, right? Because every role, boom, I'm in defensive mode, and I basically let my opponent, whatever the belt, from a white belt to black belts, whatever, just to work their offensive game, and I'm just going to play my defensive game. But then I'm like, man, I'm missing out on this whole other half of jiu-jitsu, which is an offense. And so just the last couple of times in jiu-jitsu, I don't know where, again, it wasn't conscious, but all of a sudden, and again, I'd still start, do my thing, kind of, start from the back, whatever. But then when I, saw a moment where I could, reverse the position, make a sweep, that kind of thing, I would do it to the tune of like night and day, where I probably had, of the last couple times I've gone, man, I've probably had, maybe 10 different times I've tapped somebody out where normally I wouldn't tap anybody out in class. It would just be, again, defensive mode. And so, and again, it's been a subconscious outcome and result of a very conscious journey of growing my emotional intelligence. So for me, it has had, and again, I'm just giving you an example in jiu-jitsu. Well, here's another one, is business. A business example. Man, how long have we wanted to do a podcast, and we wanted to grow our influence and impact on social media and stuff. For years we've wanted to do this. And why haven't we done it? Why haven't I done it? Because I was playing small, not taking risks, afraid to try, didn't learn anything because of how I viewed failure and just people pleasing, all this stuff. And so again, as my emotional intelligence is growing, the fear just seems to be dissipating in areas that used to absolutely control me and my decision-making process and my thought process and my mindset and stuff. So emotional intelligence has a tremendous amount to do with how we view failure.
And one of the ways that I think that it helps is because emotional intelligence helps us to be in control of our emotions rather than our emotions being in control of us, right? And before you have emotional intelligence, you don't realize it. You are just being controlled and run by your emotions and by your feelings and by your fears and all these things without realizing it. That's the problem, is you don't realize it's happening. You're just exhibiting this behavior that you might think, well, this is just how I am. Or you might just be frustrated and not know why you're frustrated. You might be feeling like I'm up against this wall and I don't know why I'm up against this wall and I don't know what to do with it. All of those things are because emotions are in control. Emotions are running the show without us even really understanding it, of why it's happening. And so I just want to share a couple ways that we have viewed failure differently and kind of the way that how that's played out. One of the things that we did early on, well, that Noble did, is he started calling it Professor Failure, right? So giving it a name, Professor Failure, because what that did for us is that totally changed what failure was. It took a failure from being something bad and to be avoided, and it turned it into a teacher. It turned it into something that we could say, okay, let's look at our failure differently. Instead of it meaning any of those negative things about ourselves, all it means now is that we're learning. So now we went to it with a totally new mindset and a totally new question. And we could approach failure, say, well, what can I learn from this? How can I learn? And I have to share this story because he's taught our daughter this from the time she was little. Professor Failure. In fact, sometimes he would even say, well, how did you learn today? I mean, how did you fail today? Right. And what did you learn from that? Well, so just this morning, we were sitting here in our living room, and I look and Lena's working on something, right? That she's working on. And I look over and she's got like 5 or 6. She keeps pulling out the paper and wadding it up and, throwing it down and starting over, and pulling out the paper, wadding it up and throwing it down and starting over. And so I looked over, I said, what are you doing over there? She goes, I'm failing. Just like that. Like no frustration. Now, sometimes there's frustration with it, but this time there wasn't. No frustration, no anger, no berating herself. Just she understands the process now. She understands that if she keeps failing, she's going to figure it out as long as she's willing to keep going back and learning something from the last failure and changing and trying again and continuing to learn. And I just thought, yes, that's it. That is what we've wanted to teach this child is that those failures are part of the process.
And so, in terms of, so a great question to ask yourself is how can you view failure differently?
Yes.
And let me go back to one previous point that we discussed. I just want to kind of hit it again. Like, I think it's so important. Like, who said failing is bad? Who said failing is bad? Right. And again, we already talked about it, schools and that trends, some of their families, those kind of stuff.
But you're an adult now. You're not. You're probably out of the school system, and so now you're in charge of your own life.
That's right. Jobs, don't necessarily always celebrate failure. So it's just fascinating to me that we grow up without challenging some of these things that we've been fed and trained and indoctrinated with. Without questioning, we just accept it. Oh yeah, failure is bad. Oh man, you shouldn't fail. Oh my goodness, I'm scared of all that stuff. Like, no. That's ridiculous. Like, it's professor failure. How can you? So for me in jiu-jitsu, again, using jiu-jitsu as an analogy, for me, man, you can't do jiu-jitsu without failing. You can't, listen, if you want to be good, if you want to have mastery in anything in your life, listen, failure is going to be part of the deal. You are going to have a professor as part of your education curriculum that happens to be failure. And so again, be intentional. Kathy mentioned that we celebrate failure with our kid. I made it part of our bedtime ops, have cuddle time with our kid and bedtime ops, for many years, I would say, and still every now and then I need to be more consistent at it. But hey, Elena, how'd you fail today? How did you fail today? Well, Poppy, I can't think of something. Well, then let's get out of bed real quick and let's go fail at something. So and I don't care what it is. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything. I don't care what it is, but we're going to fail at something. Right. And I want to rewire, and not just rewire, I want to wire her brain such that failure has no emotional control over her, that she sees it as a learning device, a learning tool in the journey, not a negative. A basketball is part of playing basketball. Well, part of playing life and business and entrepreneurship is failure. That's our basketball, if you will. You can't play basketball without failing. You can't be a UFC fighter. I love watching UFC and MMA, mixed martial arts and Ultimate Fighting Championship stuff. You cannot be a UFC fighter, a mixed martial arts fighter, without getting punched in the face. And you think, well, will you fail if you get punched in the face? Listen, that's part of the deal. The greatest fighters in the world still get punched in the face. That is part of your journey as a fighter, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as an influencer, is this concept of failure. And again, reframing it. So what are some things to think about in regards to failure and growing your EQ? And these are kind of some refreshers that we've talked about in a number of the different episodes. But one of the things that we've learned, and we homeschool with a program called Classical Conversations. We use a classical model of education, and one of those things is that is repetition is part of that education process of learning and stuff. So if you hear us repeat a lot of stuff, that's with intention. So one thing to keep in mind about growing your EQ and reframing this concept of failure in your mind is it's a process. This is not an event. Okay, I've heard a podcast and boom, all of a sudden, whip-de-doo, I think about failure as a professor, and it's something to be celebrated and to be intentional about, learning from failure, right? So that's not going to just happen overnight. It's going to be a process. So how can you come up with some systems and processes to be intentional about failure and learning from your failure and not just repeating the same failure over and over again necessarily, but how can you evolve, grow, and improve from each of those failures?
And not only is it a process, but it's going to be a process of failure too. So it's like it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 4 steps forward, 5 steps back, right? It's going to feel like, man, some days you're going to feel like, man, I'm making huge progress. And some days you're going to feel like, am I growing at all? Am I changing at all? That's normal. We want you to know that's normal. Like, we need to normalize failure. We need to normalize the fact that this isn't easy and it's going to take work, and you're going to have days that you're on the mountaintop and days you're in the valley. And it's okay. And when you know it's okay, you don't get freaked out. You don't get messed up, and you don't give up on everything just because you're in the valley and because it's not looking like you thought success should look.
Another one is, another tip for kind of growing your EQ and again, how to properly view failure is find a community, find a tribe, right? Your vibe attracts your tribe. Find a tribe, find a community or an accountability partner. We've got a couple of them. You've got EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast, Facebook group. We've got the 360 Movement Personal Growth Tribe. There are a number of different ones out there and others, right? I just mentioned a couple that we're involved with, but there are others that you can check out and pursue. And the thing is, you want an emotionally healthy environment. I tell you, there are a lot of communities and a lot of organizations, businesses, that kind of thing, that are not emotionally healthy, that don't view failure and, emotional health and fitness from a healthy perspective. There's a lot of control and manipulation out there. And, part of that EQ journey is being able to recognize that. Yeah. Are you even able to recognize it? Anyway, the point is, find a positive, healthy, growth-minded community that you can grow alongside with.
Yeah. And here, recognize it's going to take work. Like it's your fear of failure is not going to go away overnight. Your emotional intelligence is not going to grow in one day or because you listen to one podcast. Like, it is going to take work. You're going to have to put the time into it. And as entrepreneurs, this is hard. Like, this is hard because entrepreneurs so often think, no, I just need to work on my sales strategy or my networking strategy or my marketing strategy, or I need to update my website, or I need to work on my branding. And we think that those are the answers. Okay. Those are some of the answers, but none of that is working on you. Right? It's the whole difference between you can work on your business, you can work in your business, right? And then there's working on you. There's your own personal growth, because you can have the greatest of all of those, but if you're too afraid of failure that you don't put yourself out there, then guess what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you have all this fancy schmancy stuff. Or if you can't grow yourself, you can't grow your business because you're too afraid, well, then it doesn't matter if you have all the fanciest and latest of technology and all of that set up. So you're going to have to be intentional about doing this work. And I guess the way that we want to close this episode is asking why. Why would you do this hard work, right? We're not here selling easy. There's nothing easy about this. It's way easier to go watch a video on, the latest marketing strategy because you don't have to face you in the mirror. So we're not selling easy to you, but we're telling you, if you do this work, it will change your life.